Warning, this podcast contains explicit sexual language and should only be listened to at work if you're looking for an excuse to connect with your HR representative. Additionally, all mentions of the word women include cis and trans women. For my friends who are genderqueer, gender fluid, figuring it out, anything in between, and feel like this conversation is also important for you, you are welcome here.
Will you open up with me? These pages, they can feed your innermost desires. Do you feel inspired? Are you getting what you need? Are you coming curiously? A secret safe with me. And here you can simply be yourself. Jace reads romance. Come on in, come on in, come on.
Hi, y'all. This is Jace, she, they, and you found Jace Reads Romance, a community dedicated to empowering women about sex and sexuality through the reading of romance novels. I have an author with me today. I know I've had readers, I've had advocates, I've had conference developers and bookstore owners, but an actual author is not actually sitting across from me because the internet. But please introduce yourself. Tell us about your book.
Well, hello, my name is Sabrina Burns, and I just released my debut romance novel called Come Here to Me. It's the first in a planned series called Crushes on Campus. So it is brand baby new in the world, released October 18th. And I am excited to sit here with Jace and talk about the journey of how I found romance, how I started writing romance, what it's like to self-publish and like own your business as a romance writer, all that stuff. So let's do it. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So I'm going to spoil things just a little bit because
Do it.
I feel like every episode I secretly, not so secretly, reveal more about myself instead of just romance. But I have known Sabrina for, I won't even tell y'all how long, many years.
Well, date us.
And it's an unreasonable amount of time. Time that makes me feel like way more of an adult than I should be.
We look not a day older. In fact, we look better.
I'm going to agree with you on
Yeah.
that. Definitely better. So Sabrina is the first person that I've known Sabrina as a reader. Both of us were readers together and we've known each other for years as readers. And I was so excited when I learned that Sabrina had decided to dive into writing. So Sabrina is the person who taught me who Tessa Dare was. I had never read a Tessa Dare book. I
so
know.
glad. I
Yeah.
can't believe that. I mean, anytime I get to share the Tessa Dare love, I do. I have and I will continue to. If you're listening and if you haven't read a Tessa Dare historical, it's like the comfort food, grilled cheese, like macaroni and cheese, ice cream, whatever makes you happy when you are sad kind of romance novel. Like read a Tessa Dare. Get in there.
Be careful. I accidentally started two different series and they were, I'm not going to say the same plot, but a very similar plot. I'm like, oh, I need to make sure that I diversify a little bit. But I remember first, so you were the person who taught me about Tessa Dare, but I remember first the novels that I saw you reading were not romance. So talk to us about your journey in reading and how you found romance.
Okay, well, definitely, I was an intellectual, literary snob for a long time in my early adulthood, because I was just like, I want to read the serious, cool stuff, both the classics and the contemporaries. Why would I read something with a pink cover? It's so silly and girly and whatever. And I think that on some level there was some internalized misogyny there, and we're working through that in our adulthood now. So that's part of it. But what's kind of hilarious is that the person who really got me to give romance a try was my brother, who is a straight man who's like a drummer and loves football and has a big old beard, and just like you'd look at him and you would not be like, yes, a romance reader. But he and his band had a romance novel book club together, and they were reading historical romances with like they were reading an Elizabeth Hoyt series. And so it was very just like uh, silly kind of titles, like Seduced by a Sinner, and they're very
Hmm.
bodice rippery kind of covers. And I was like, what is this that you're reading? This, I don't understand. And he sent me the whole series and got me into it and being like, listen, this one's basically like a Beauty and the Beast redo, but it made me feel like I too could be lovable, even though I'm a beast. Like this, just this
Oh.
very fun thing. And that we got into it and became a funny, silly thing that we talked about. And especially in the early pandemic and like quarantine times, I was just like, there is something so reassuring about reading a romance. Like there's a guaranteed happy ending that we're going to get to.
Hmm.
You've got safety as you're working through the trauma or the conflict or whatever it is, because you know it's going to work out. And that was something my nervous system really needed. And, when you read enough of those, you start to really get familiar with the tropes. The more you know about any kind of art form that you engage with, the more you just love all the little pieces, all the little cogs that make it work. And
Hmm.
I've loved it from there. And my brother and I ourselves have our own podcast, which is a romance novel book club podcast called Euphemisms, where we chat about this kind of stuff. So it's something that I have wholeheartedly embraced now, even though I used to poo poo it.
I love that. And I do remember reading romance. Reading romance is something that as you've said, I've done for years. And it is so fascinating, interesting, and almost like I have such righteous feelings of this thing that I've been reading for so long. Finally, people are like, like it's almost like the good drugs. Like, just try. It's like exercise or meditation. Just try it. I'm sure you'll like it. No, and then you do. Um, but I am curious because one of the things that I noticed about you, and we discussed a lot, is that you were one of the people who read more than I did. And so so many more books than I did at the time. And what would you say your reading percentages are? Because some people just go whole
Mm.
hog, I'm gonna read romance and nothing but romance and leave my life behind. Or do you diversify the reading that you have still with genres that you were previously exploring or leaning deeper into?
No, I diversify, but I think it's also I'm very vibe and mood oriented. Like if I'm in a place where I'm just kind of like I'm feeling really low, I'm going to grab a romance. I'm going to read 8 romances in a row probably within the week just because I'm like hang on, like I'm not in a good place right now. Or but I still read a lot of nonfiction. I love contemporary fiction. I what do I have over there? I'm reading a book about anxiety. I just picked up like a book about depression and nature. Like I don't know. I read a lot, but romance takes up probably at least 50% of my yearly intake at this point.
You're
And
talking to
I'm
someone who has currently read 220 romance books this year. So,
way to go. No, and I love that. And I used to be kind of like siloed in my own like subgenres of romance as a reader.
mhm,
Like I read pretty much almost entirely historical to start with, and then started to dip my toe a little bit into contemporary. And I mainly stayed in those two spaces. And then once we started doing the podcast, we're like, well, I guess we have to do a little bit of romantasy. I guess we have to do some dark
mhm,
romance, some sports romance, some, you know, cowboy romance, all this kind of stuff that I had not touched with a 10-foot pole. I'm like,
yeah.
okay, let's see what's out there. And what's so beautiful about this genre is that it is just huge. There is something for everyone. And that honestly was really freeing for me as a writer to take some of the anxiety about writing your own romance out of it. Because I always say, like, your mileage may vary. You cannot be everyone's favorite flavor. There is something for everyone out there. And I try not to say, oh, that's a terrible book or a terrible author or anything. I'm just like, it's just not for me. It's just not my thing. Or that's not my trope. I never want to read a small town romance. Not my thing, you know?
Yeah. So, you've already touched upon it. You were already a reader. You not got suckered in, but you got swept into the
Lured. I was
romance,
lured.
lured, just just the breadcrumbs of intrigue set by the world and your brother. What made you decide, I want to write one? I have a story that I want to tell, and I
I
want to
think
do it through romance.
I had I had written a novel prior to this one, that was not a romance, that was more just kind of contemporary fiction, and, I'm not a plotter, I'm a pantser, is what they say, is just kind of like, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna see where it takes me, where the characters go, and I had become very curious about writing romance just because I had started living in that world so much, and I love, like, the structure of it. It makes a lot of sense to me on a
Hmm.
storytelling level. And there are so many different ways you can go with it. And I knew at this point what tropes I really liked and what I wanted to explore. And I tend to really fall. I'm like, I love a silly, off the wall romance, but at the end of the day, what I am most drawn to reading and writing are emotionally grounded stories.
Hmm.
And I actually, this one was inspired by a dream that I had. The kitchen scene at a party in about the middle of the book, I fully had a
Oh.
dream. Yeah. And I woke up being like, oh, that's interesting. I could write a whole story around that. Let's just see what happens. So that one was fully just my subconscious saying it's about time to try. And that was exciting. And then writing this one, knowing that especially in romance, like series are king or queen or whatever the royalty is, that's what you
Hmm.
do. And I was already like, oh well, Charlie needs a story, so I'm in the process of editing Charlie's book right now, and so that's so exciting for me is just to be like, okay, we're just gonna take a swing. And this one, I even felt like does not read to me in retrospect as like the most romancy romance in the way that it is structured or in all of the tropes. And the second one I think
Hmm.
feels a little bit more romancy romance. Not to say that this one isn't a romance because it is, but it's a little bit more of an emo romance. Like, have you read How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kwang? It's not
No,
quite that.
it's over there, and people keep saying that I'm gonna cry. I don't want to cry.
Oh, it's so good. It's such a good book, and it's definitely that one's more emo than mine, but there's, like, a little bit more of an achiness to it that's not
Hmm.
always present in romance, so I knew that that was gonna feel either people were gonna say, "That's my wheelhouse," or it's not, whereas the second one feels still emotionally grounded, but a little bit more, you know, more what you'd expect necessarily.
It's not with the fight choreographer, is it?
It is not with the fight choreographer, but it is a showmance. It's gonna be a showmance book.
Oh my gosh. Oh, showmance. What a terrible thing. This is so funny. And this is a question that so none of y'all will know this because A, this is an oral medium and you cannot see Sabrina. Sabrina is very short, incredibly short. And if you look at the cover, this FMC looks incredibly short. Even knowing that Declan is 6'5", like she still looks really short. And I swear to you, when I read I'm 5'8", my note literally says, doesn't look like that from the cover.
Maybe she
but
was just really bending her knee at that moment in time, like taking a really deep step, down the block.
but
Maybe he's standing
until
on a
that
box.
moment, I don't know, until that moment, I fully was like, oh, this is Sabrina-sized person. And it is not. Apparently not a Sabrina-sized person.
No, no.
So what drew you to so we've talked about your journey, your dream. I love
Mhm.
this. The
I this
dream of the
the document for this book when I started writing it until it had a title was just Kitchen Dream.
kitchen. I don't blame you. That kitchen scene was a lot.
Mhm.
That was a lot. Also, fair warning to all the readers and I guess Sabrina, I spoil the fuck out of things. So like
Do
if you
your
didn't
thing.
know people end up together, then you don't know it's a romance. But in it's interesting. So something that a lot of writers, as I've been able to speak to them in various mediums have or in various venues have said is that the things that they enjoy reading are not always the things that they enjoy writing about. And
Hmm.
did you find in this process that the tropes and the journey of your characters aligned with the kinds of books that you prefer, or were slightly separate from those stories you gravitate to as a reader?
I think on some level it aligned. I think that, like you, I found myself frustrated with my female main character at times, but, in order for conflict and drama and story arcs to happen, people have to make mistakes. And in life, people also make mistakes. And if no one tripped up in their love story, it'd be a very short book, probably not particularly satisfying to read. Like, oh, isn't that nice? It's a tone poem, like that's not what we're looking for in a romance. We're looking for an arc. And so there, I think that, yeah, I would want to shake her too, at times. But I think that mostly aligned with what I like to read. But also, there are so many things that I love to read that I can't write. Like, I could not write you I don't know, a bouncy India Holton book if you paid me to, and I would love to be able to. Like, my imagination doesn't do that. I am way more
Hmm.
like, give me emotionally grounded stuff. If you asked me to write a paranormal, I would scream and run away from you. Like, it is not in my wheelhouse to do that. And I can enjoy reading one, but I can't, it's not my skill set. And I recognize what my skill set is. So,
It's good to know. It's it's so funny how authors, and I do, how authors have their different processes and their different vibes. And if no, if we could, Michael, I have no idea if we're going to leave this here or put it back, but we mentioned plotters versus pantsers. And so we're just going to have a moment to talk about that. So that's something you're going to hear a lot if you are a romance reader and you decide or want to stalk your favorite authors. It describes how an author writes or creates the story. And it's so interesting to me as someone who pantses from the beginning. How does that affect your process? Did you, in the process of writing this book, sorry, not affect your process, but in the process of writing this book, did you find that you wrote it in order, or did you jump around, starting with that kitchen scene and going back and finding the bridges between?
I did write the kitchen scene first, if only because I needed to get it on paper before it evaporated from my consciousness. And then I went back to the very beginning and I did something differently. And I'm doing something differently now with my romances than the way I wrote my previous novel, which is I start at the beginning, unless there's like something that is in my brain that has
Hmm.
to happen, and pop it in. And I have a rule that it's like, okay, you get X number of words in a day, and then you stop and you keep going, like that. You have to get that many in the day, and you have to keep going. You can't go back and mess with it. You can't go back and perfect it. Write the shitty first draft. You can't edit something that isn't there. If it's shitty, you
Hmm.
can edit it. And so just get the idea on paper, and later you can go back and make it pretty, but you don't get to go back and make it pretty until you wrote the whole damn thing. And that
Yeah,
is my approach now.
I love that. Were there moments that you came back to in this that you found didn't fit once you read it again? What was, like, what is your favorite or least favorite deleted scene? Like, what moment were you like, wow, that really came out of my brain and needs to be on the cutting room floor right now?
Yeah, well, honestly, that kitchen scene, in the dream that I had, because it was obviously like me in the dream, not a character in the dream. I was experiencing this. Uh, she falls asleep in his arms, fully in the kitchen.
Oh.
Just like they have this like emotional discussion that they have, and she falls asleep there in the middle of this party. And on the
Mhm.
one hand, I was like, oh, I love that as an image and as a metaphor for like him as this safe harbor for her, but functionally, it
No.
doesn't work. So I had to kill my darlings, as they say, and let that go. Um, that was one thing that I was like, I was sad to lose it, but it did not belong.
No. But it is a great moment. Like, now thinking about those two, like that he is that safe place for her, except for the fact that, their hearts are both breaking in that moment. I'm like, oh, I love the image of like, I'm so tired of this party. I'm just going to like snuggle up into my love. Except that's not really what's happening in
Right.
the
And
movie.
that he lets her, even though he has every right to be incredibly angry with her in that moment,
Oh,
you know?
God. I love Declan
So
so
good.
much. He, like, if he weren't 6'5", I want to put him in my pocket. He's
Big enough
just such
pants, you could still get him in there, I don't know.
probably he's such a beautiful cinnamon roll. And the one question I have, legitimate question, I'm like, I could probably look this up. I'm like, does Chicago have a theater department? I don't know.
They do,
Really?
but it's a bit more focused on, like, theory than, say, performance. It's like so it's like I don't believe that they have an acting degree per se, so much as
That's so
just, like,
funny.
you can study theater at U Chicago,
That's
but
so funny because the minute we met Charlie and she's like, I was at U Chicago. I'm like, girl, what were you doing at U
and
Chicago?
that's why she transferred after 1 year.
100% get out of Dodge, girl. You're not like
That was
the
not the right
nerds.
place for you,
No,
Charlie.
I do have that line highlighted of Shakespeare in the style of Bertolt Brecht. I was like, oh God, that sounds so awful.
I
Everything
mean
about that is wrong.
and if you have, like, ever been in this position being like, "Please don't come see this show, I want you to still think I'm good, and if you see this show, you won't feel that way about me anymore."
Yes, yes, I have. I have
Mm.
thought I've had many a feeling. Not many, but like enough. Enough of those that scar you. Oh my gosh, I love how not according to my conversation this is going because that's exactly I'm a bit of a pantser. I like to
It
pretend
means
I'm
the
a plotter.
conversation is flowing. You just have the
Exactly.
structure, and if you need it, you grab it. If you don't, you leave it. That's all there is to it.
So you wrote this book. It came to you in a dream. The story came out. You pantsed the whole thing.
I sure did.
sounds sounds terrible. So it just
Mhm,
sounds terrible. Did you ever consider going trad? Because this is a self-published book, as you
mhm.
said. How did you decide what to do with it next?
With the novel that I finished prior to this, which was not a romance, I did go through a bit of the process of querying agents and, seeing if I was gonna go that route with it, and number one, the publishing industry moves so, so, so slowly that that was kind of making me crazy. But it also felt similarly to being an actor, and you have to wait for someone to say yes to you in order for you to
Mhm.
act. It is not something that you do alone by yourself. And I wrote the book by myself. I know that there is a community out there that is looking for content like this, looking for books like this? Do I need to have someone else say yes to me in order for me to think that this is something that may have value to another person? I don't think I need that. And the other thing that's really cool about self publishing, even though you have to do everything yourself and that's really overwhelming, is every single creative decision, every single other decision, it goes through me. I
Mhm.
hired some people, like I hired an editor, I hired my cover designer. There were people who work, but I make the final call. And that is refreshing. And I own my work. It is not held by a company. And owning my own work is really cool. And so I get to decide the direction that we go.
Yeah. And that's something that I think many people don't understand about self-publishing, and that there are people who make long careers out of self-publishing and want to stay in that space for those very reasons, for the creative control that they have over how their covers look, how the story can go, what language they can use, what marketing tools they have at their disposal. And that just because trad puts the big thing about trad is it puts you into bookstores, but that might
Mhm.
not necessarily be where your readers are. So if that's not where you think your community is, or that's not where you think people are going to find you, then it doesn't make sense to go through that system.
And I mean, truly, I belong to Romance Writers of America, and I got to listen to some really interesting panel discussions
Hmm.
around, once you sell your book to one of the traditional publishing houses, they can tell you to change whatever they want. They own it now. So even though your
Hmm.
name is on the cover, it is truly their book at that point. And while you may get an advance, possibly you will never like hit that on a royalty level. And your books might get remaindered and they give you about 30 days worth of marketing and then it's over anyway. And so
Hmm.
if you want to have a long life with this book and market it however you want for however long it's out there, then why wouldn't you just choose to own it yourself? It is a lot to research. I'll grant you that.
Hmm.
I did a lot of research to do all these pieces and I'm learning so much what I'll do differently for the next book, but I mean, that's doing anything new and
Yeah.
that's only something to celebrate, I think, even though sometimes it makes me want to throw up.
It's a lot. A lot. I think some people don't realize the absolute beast that is creating a book, because it's not just writing a story. It's not just writing a story and reading it and hoping there are no typos and just into the world. There are many components that go into this. What were the avenues that you chose to self-publish through? Because I believe there are several choices. And what made you choose the way that your book is published?
Yeah, so the kind of binary that you as a self-published author right now can go is either publishing wide, which is everywhere. There are a lot of different avenues to go purchase the book, or you can go Amazon, you can go KDP and be exclusive to Amazon. And
Mm-hmm.
going exclusively with Amazon, on the one hand, simplifies things. You only have to deal with the one, distribution piece. And they do pay for, if you do the unlimited Kindle, they pay you
Mm-hmm.
per page read. That's interesting, because then it's like it's free to people. They're not making a purchase. You might get more readers that way. You might make more money. Um, I have always wanted to see my book in someone's hands. Like you showed it at the beginning of this podcast, Jace. You held it up to the camera. I'm like, it exists. It's tangible. It's something you can hold it. I'm a physical book reader. Like I have read on an e-reader, but it's really not for me. I want to hold it. I want to smell it. I want to flip the pages. I want to put it on my bookshelf. And I also, it's a dream to see it in a bookstore, see it in a library. And so if I wanted to do that, it needed to be wide. And that was why I chose that particular route.
Amazing. And so that means that your book is available in a variety of places and not
Yeah.
just one space.
Hey, if you're a
Uh,
librarian or a bookseller, you could go on Ingram Spark and order it wholesale right now.
Speaking of the physical book, there are lots of different ways that you can print books and sizes
Mhm.
and fonts and things. What was the process like of creating the physical book? Was there any say that you had, or did you have to make those? Do you have to and get to make those kind of decisions?
I got to make those decisions. Initially, I was like, oh, I'll just format this myself for free in Microsoft Word. And let me tell you, that's painfully difficult. It shouldn't be that difficult, and it is. And so I decided that I'd had enough of ripping out my own hair after, I don't know, a couple hours of trying to format the
Yeah.
book. And I basically, even sizing wise, I was looking at like the size of the paperbacks that I like. And I tend to be, I like a hardcover if it's like a nice fancy book, but like I love a paperback. It just feels so good. Throw it in your purse. And this is the right size for me for that, 5 by 8. And so I ended up using vellum to format it just because it gave me hours of my life back. And you have a lot of
Hmm.
pretty choices in terms of how it can look. I experimented a good amount. Um, I think for the next book, I might make the font slightly smaller because I was like, damn, I feel like if I wore glasses, I might not need to wear glasses with these. Font felt a little bit big to me, but like, hey, you loved it.
I loved it. I don't, so even, I mean, this is me being old and weird and oh, my eyes. I loved it. I thought this was great. And I am someone who annotates. I'm a book ruiner. I don't know
Mm,
if this is going to like hurt your soul, but like if you can
no,
see your spine is like destroyed
that's honestly
by
super cool.
me.
I don't
Yeah.
annotate. Like I keep my books pristine, but to know that someone was reading closely enough to annotate, I love it. Go for it.
Oh, yeah. my one moment where I liked Adam with the partial truth bomb. Like,
I would be delighted to flip through your annotated copy at some point, Jace.
some, oh, the moment I lied circled 80,000 times. Bad
Yeah.
Emma. Oh my God. Yeah. So I write all of my notes and I liked the size of your font, if for no other reason than I felt like there was space for me to make all of those notes without covering up the rest of it. My only complaint is some of your chapters are so long. And I'm like,
Second
oh,
book, that does get resolved a little bit.
I was
There
like,
are more chapters that are shorter.
yeah, it was just one of those moments of like, I need to be able to like put the book down and like go to the bathroom, and I can't do that, not in a
You can't do
chapter.
it.
I'm like,
Yeah.
but it's like 25 pages. Um, which is me being a nitpicky human. Like that's
I think
my
that it's
preference
just
and means
preference. I think those are
like that
preferences.
it has nothing to do with you as a writer, and you can be like, fuck off. I like
Yeah.
40,000 page chapters.
Well, what I think is really interesting, and my brother Eric and I talked about this a lot as we talked about different romances and what our style is and isn't as we
Yeah.
cover different subgenres, is I was like, it's a little odd when you self-publish a romance novel and it's not closed door, and your mom and your aunts are going to read it and things like that, and like I don't need detailed feedback from family members on this. If you plan to read the book, okay, do you want me to tell you what pages to skip? I mean, damn. But like beyond that, I was talking to him about how writing sex scenes is a little, you approach it a little trepidatiously, as it were. Like, honestly, it was
Okay.
some of the easiest stuff to write, honestly. But the awareness that, like sex with humans, there are going to be people who are into it, or it does absolutely nothing for them, or they hate it just because sex can be so many things and people like so many different things. You cannot walk into that thinking that you're going to make everyone happy or that everyone's going to think it's hot. That's just not a realistic expectation. So you just have to write the sex scene and the relationship that you think that these characters would have. And so that is the way I attempted to approach that.
Okay. So you started this, so now I can ask about it. What made you decide to have an open door sex scene in this story?
Oh,
Because it is a choice.
because I don't read, or I don't like to read closed door romance. My personal feeling is that the rule about storytelling is show, don't tell. So,
Mhm.
that's it, in my life and for my money and relationships, sex is an important part of that. So, why would I rob the reader of experiencing that with them? And I know that that's not
Mhm.
every reader's preference, and they're not going to like my books. That's okay.
That's okay. Where do you consider yourself on the spice meter?
Mm,
Like 1 to 5. Not as a reader,
two,
but like this book.
I don't know, two, 2.5, like two maybe for this book. I don't think it's particularly like, I guess it depends on what you've read, like what your spice meter is. Where does it land on yours? I think it's two. Like I don't think it's like tame per se, but I think it's not like
I'm trying to find where's my clit notations, because I have those. I
your
have those.
clitorature for the
I
clitorature.
I do. No, I if you haven't listened to those episodes, I mark whenever external clit stimulation is mentioned during penetrative sex,
Nice.
because 20 years ago that didn't exist at all.
Oh
And
God.
it's still almost never talked about in sex ed or in romance novels, or certainly not in other forms of media.
Hmm.
And I have shared this on the podcast, but the way that I learned that was even a possibility was through a romance novel many years
Oh my
after I
God.
became sexually active.
Romance novels are doing a public service.
A
I
public
love it.
service. And like, I don't blame those partners and I don't blame myself at the time. But like, how would you have known if
You don't know
everything
what you
you've
don't know. Yeah.
exactly? But I do remember the first time I read that and I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
You're
So I do
like,
make
I
note
gotta
of that.
try that. Okay.
I was like, this, what do you mean? Oh my God. Which I honestly, I think it's like a 1. Or
Yeah,
what, 5?
it's not that spicy.
It's
But I
not that
mean,
spicy?
but it's about, I would say it's probably about like 10% of the book, page-wise, are sex scenes,
Is that true?
Probably. I think that first one's maybe 20 pages.
The first sex scene is 20 pages?
It might be. Maybe I have to go back and count again. I think it's around there.
I don't know. Oh, because then there's also the champagne part. Yes.
Mhm.
Maybe. I will look. Um, but there is that. So you like Open Door. You wanted to write Open Door, accurately representing relationships as they are with sex that happens between humans. Was there a moment, like, do you have, there are people like, I know you, I will see you in real life, and
Mhm.
do you have any feelings about this being out there in the world or attached to you? And the reason I say that is because sadly what I've noticed is if you are a woman who speaks openly about sex, then people feel privileged to comment about sex and specifically invade your, like, with questions or comments, the sex they are assuming you are having or are not having. And was there any part of you that went, do I want to open myself up to this?
I think once I decided I was going to write a romance novel, and I knew, just based on the kind of romance novels I like to read, that it was going to be open door, um, that I knew there were going to be sex scenes, and otherwise I wouldn't want to write it. But also, I definitely am. Like I said, like family members are going to read it. You know me and you've read it. And I have thought about, like, are people assuming that the sex that is in the book and that is going to be in the books that I write is is the sex that I'm having? And are they going to make judgments about that or whatever? And like I said, just because this is the sex that's in the book that I wrote does not necessarily mean that that is the sex that I have. Or, it feels a little weird that people might look at me and say, I wonder if, Sabrina and her husband are just like Emma and Declan in bed. And if they want to think that, I'm not going to stop them. But, as it's just part of the thing. Like, people are always going to think what they want about you anyway. If they ask me and I didn't like the way it was asked, I have a pretty good tendency to put people right back in their place. But I don't think that saying yes to sexual content, say writing it, is the
Mhm.
same thing as saying, yes, I will tell you any and every detail about my personal sex life, no matter who you are, because you were able to purchase a copy of my book. That's not the same thing. Consent is not like door is open, door is closed for everyone and everything. It's not that. So that's not the way I view it.
If y'all have never thought about it that way, think about it now. Just because an author writes open door sex scenes does not necessarily mean that that is their sex life, or that you have any right to ask them about their own personal sex life. Fuck off. Cool.
It sounds like a soapbox it was important for you to stand on for a minute.
It really was. It's odd and sad to me how many times I've seen authors in romance asked incredibly weird questions like, have you and your husband tried out everything in your book? And you're like, dude, she writes reverse harem vampire romance. Like,
He
no.
definitely has sucked her blood. Totally.
Like,
I can't
totally.
imagine that she could have written that if she hadn't experienced it personally. Couldn't be done.
No, my favorite response by an author was like, would you ever ask a thriller writer if they've practiced stabbing someone? Like,
Oh, God.
so no. And as you move into this second book in this series, what are the things that you're noticing when it comes to intimacy that are different? But like, Charlie is such a different character than Emma, and I'm assuming who Charlie ends up with is not going to be the sweet, nerdy Irish man that Declan is. And how has kind of getting into the heads of these character driven stories changed the way that you write and you view their intimacy?
Mm, I think that you are so right that it's just like Charlie is Emma's best friend in this book, and she is so far from Emma, who is like buttoned up and restrained and a people pleaser and has a hard time relaxing. And Charlie is an extrovert and an actor and like very confident in herself and very has more of a sexual appetite, frankly, and hooks up with a lot of people, prefers to be either one and done or like we have explicit rules. I don't really do feelings. Obviously, the way she approaches sex is going to be very different from the way that Emma approaches sex. And that was honestly a really interesting writing exercise to approach it that way. And I think there's an element in all of us where it's nice to be reminded that we as individuals and our sexuality is not a fixed point, and
Mhm.
it is dynamic and it can change. It can change day to day based on your mood or the period of life that you are in and what your interests are and what you want to try and do. And I think that romance has been like kind of a cool thing to even use as a jumping off point of saying to your partner, like, oh, hey, so like we've never done X, Y, or Z. And is that because it's a hard no for you? Or are you just not interested? And then maybe you try
Mhm.
it and maybe you go, actually, I hated that and never again. Or like that really worked for me and I had no idea because like it just, like you said, you hadn't experienced it in your own life or didn't even know it was something that you could ask for until you
Yeah.
saw it modeled in another way. And I think, especially the way, hopefully, it's different for women and everybody, really, now of younger generations, that there isn't quite so much just like hiding away of sexual education in the sense beyond just like, okay, here's how not to get a disease or get pregnant if you plan on having sex, but how you might enjoy sex or learn what you enjoy was not part
Mhm.
of sexual education when
No.
we were younger. And if you want to turn to your smutty books to get it, absolutely go learn, friends. Like get the education, get the knowledge, however you can get it.
Honestly, I think that my hope for this next generation, because what if for me at least, and I know Steffi, you and I have talked about it, it's very different experience where I had what is considered very robust sex ed in my upbringing in my school. I had an understanding of sex and sex positive from my parents, but the conversation of how do we enjoy sex, especially for people with vulvas, was not part of that equation. And there was a lot of conversation about how men enjoy sex, people with penises enjoy sex, and and that Cosmo taught me a lot, I'm sure, but not once did it try to help me enjoy it myself. And so my hope is that the messaging that the younger generation is getting is more centered on sex as an enjoyable activity for all humans, and that they are learning both how to ask for what they need, but also how to think about what their partner needs and understand, especially for, I'm going to generalize, but like people with penises and mainly men, people raised in the patriarchy, think about satisfying their partner by asking, which I love. Declan does it. He's like, what do you like? I have it. I know he does because I highlighted. Tell me what you like on page 267. And but that's important. And kind of like with asking for directions on a road trip, like just because you have to ask for directions doesn't mean you're not going to get to the destination. It will help you get to that destination faster if you know the proper way to get there.
Oh, and even when you just said like that sex is an enjoyable activity, I immediately wanted to jump into, and if it isn't for you, either generally or in the moment, use your words. Like like
Mm-hmm.
communication being just such a key point of, and not having to have it be emotionally charged of like, if you don't like something that's happening with your partner right now, that means that you don't like your partner or they should feel insecure. It just means like, hey, we're just doing feedback in real time. Like, and I would so much rather know if something isn't working for you than to for you to silently and stoically just be like, yep, whatever you want to give me is what I'll take. Like, no, that's not good sex. You got to talk.
And there are so many reasons why one would need to pivot in the middle of intimacy, and some of it is like it doesn't feel good in the intimate areas, or you're in a new position and you got a cramp in your calf. Like you there's
There
so
could be
many
something so
things.
situational about, like, why something isn't good in the moment that have nothing to do
Yeah.
with skill level or, whether you're attracted to someone or anything like that, and if you don't feel a level of comfort in saying, like, "Hey, I need a pause," or "I need a regroup," or whatever it is, it's probably not a good sign, and I think that
Yeah.
a lot of us, growing up were, um mm, socialized to believe that we could not even just not say no, but not give feedback or ask for any kind of concession for our not even pleasure, but for our own comfort. And I really
Mhm.
hope that that's no one's experience ever. But yeah, I would argue for that is just use your words, and the right partner will be grateful that you did.
Yeah, 100%. So, what new perspective do you have on the romance genre from this seat as a writer? Like, what has it made you discover, appreciate, glean, criticize more about this genre and this community?
Oh, what's so kind of funny, like, my immediate hot take was learning that kind of even the tropes or the subgenres or the publishing schedule that people have, like, there are some really smart people writing romance that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. That is not for me. Like, I was in listening to a panel where an author was talking about how they have a monthly release schedule, and like and I was just thinking, how can you quality controls if you're releasing a whole novel every month and talking about writing to market and doing all these algorithms to see what specifically is selling and then deciding you are writing something that specifically fits in what is really hitting the Amazon algorithm right now. And I just know that I am not a person who is just going to be like, tell me what to write and I will write it. I have to feel authentically drawn to write it in the first place. And that might not be what's the most marketable thing right now. And I have to make peace with that. And I also have to know that, like, at my max right now, I can't imagine releasing more than 2 books in a year, and 1 in a year feels like a lot, to say in order for me to feel confident that I did what I could to make it, if not the best book that it could be, because you could edit a story forever and it would never be
Mhm.
done. And it wouldn't necessarily get better the longer you edited it. At some point you have to decide, let it go, let it be, let it exist in the world. It's its own
Yeah.
creation. Um, but like the amount of thought that has gone into, like, okay, well, paranormal and reverse harem are really big right now. So if I write a paranormal reverse harem with the word cocky in the title, then it's going to sell 4 times more than this other thing that I could have written that's not so the market right now. And the amount of strategic planning that goes into that kind of release, I'm like, well, my hat is off to you, and I cannot do that.
That is that blows my mind that someone could write and publish a novel like every month based on the algorithm.
Right? It's crazy.
No. That's
It's not for
so
me.
bonkers.
That's not the
That's
way
not
my
for
brain works.
me. No, I too am wondering, like, a full-blown I don't mind a novella, like, you give me a novella every month, but, like, or a series or something. I like, off mic, I wanna know who that was. Like, I wanna know
Oh,
who
I
that
wonder. I
was.
could probably go find that for you. Yeah.
That is crazy to me. Um, I think we're sadly almost out of questions and time if the look that Sephi is giving me in the notes in our chat to go by. She's giving me 2 time checks.
Well, I'd be happy to come
So,
back at any point if you want to have further romance discussions. This is clearly a big part of my life that I enjoy discussing.
I always like to talk about romance.
Mhm.
But for a first time guest at the very least, because we've had guests multiple times, I don't ask the questions multiple times. I have 5 questions that I end each interview with. The first, what is your favorite romance novel?
Okay. I'm going to say Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert is one of my absolute favorites. And for me, that was the chronic illness representation in that was so important to me. And like, I don't have fibromyalgia, I don't have exactly what the character does in that book, but the some line midway through where it's just like being sick doesn't have to de-sex a person because I was like, I'm sick all the time. That's just part of my life. And that like I was misty the whole second half of me reading that book. I felt seen in a way that was so beautiful. And I was like, I haven't
Hmm.
read like contemporary fiction that made me feel seen in this way. And I was like, way to go, romance. So big plug for Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I love all of her books. Yeah.
Amazing. I That's the next series. I just finished the Midnight Heat
Oh, nice.
trilogy.
And take it the second one, take a hint. Danny Brown is so fun. Probably has my favorite hero of that trilogy. Can't wait to hear your
Oh,
thoughts.
I will get there one day. I have so many books. But where and how do you prefer to read?
I prefer to read a physical book. I will read anywhere. I will read on the train. I will read on my couch. I will read outside. I will read walking down the sidewalk without missing a beat or tripping. I will read anywhere. But if I can be sitting under a blanket with my dog and like a glass of wine, that's also pretty damn ideal for me.
I too can walk down a Chicago sidewalk reading a book and not trip. I
I'm glad
find
we
that I
shared
trip
that.
less when I'm reading.
Yeah, you're focused. You're in your zone. You're in
In
a
the
flow
zone.
state.
It's 100% true. So at Jace Reads Romance, we have this concept called comfy sexy. And it is the idea that in your comfiest clothes, your safest space, you can also explore your sexuality through the reading of a romance novel.
Okay.
What does that phrase, comfy sexy, mean to you?
I think comfy sexy for me like means like when I feel most kind of like I'm feeling myself but in a way that just feels so there's no need to question it and it's not even that big a deal, just like I just feel so fully myself. And if it's when I am doing something where I feel really confident and engaged and happy and alive, like I feel really comfy, sexy on stage when everything's hitting, you know, that really does it for me. Is just knowing that I feel really good about who I am and what I'm doing, and that I'm really engaged in it. That makes me feel comfy, sexy.
Love that. When do you feel, just generically, your sexiest?
Mm, generically.
I mean, you can tell us a specific incident if you feel comfortable, but in general, if you're like,
Oh,
I know that I'm feeling myself
I'll tell you
because,
the most recent time I felt sexy. So Saturday night, I was at like a Halloween party, like concert show. It was like big, loud, crowded space, and everybody dresses up, and I dressed as a Morticia Adams,
mhm.
and I stepped out of the space at one point just to get some air, and what was like a college-aged boy, probably shouldn't have been in the bar in the first place, swayed his way over to me and was like, you look like from that show Wednesday on Netflix." And I was like, I don't even think I responded. And he like swayed back, swayed forward again. He goes, "Do you want any alcohol?" I was just like, I haven't been hit on like this and this ineptly in so long. But I was just like, I watched a whole YouTube makeup tutorial. I had the hair done. I had the full on dress. And I was like, I know I look good. And you want to know how I know? I know. I need to call that kid's mom because he's not okay.
That is so beautiful, both because super drunk young boy, like, aw, sweet, and also because you knew you looked good.
I mean, I knew I looked good, but I mean, like, if, like, let's say I had been down for that, what was he going to do with me? He was not prepared.
No,
You
no,
know, it was not going to be
adorable.
okay.
Oh,
But I'll remember
college
him fondly.
boys. I don't remember college boys fondly.
I'll remember this one fondly. Do you want any alcohol? Not even can I buy you a drink.
Do you want any alcohol? That is like, it makes it sound like, do you want a crayon? And like, I've got a pack in,
I'll
like,
share.
let's share crayons together. I love to color. Oh my gosh. That doesn't give me hope for the future, but like, where was that boy when I was in college?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe he was at he wasn't
No,
no, he was alive. He
he
was
was not
probably
ready.
alive.
I mean, he was quite young. Let's go with he was actually quite young, but they did not make them that adorable when I was in college.
I think his appeal would have worn off pretty quickly because he was not anywhere near the barometer of sober. But, it
Oh,
was fun for a
no.
moment.
Yeah. And you know what? That's all it needed to be. Fun for the moment. Oh gosh. Okay, before we finish up, what is one thing that you want women to know about sex or sexuality? Like your soapbox thing.
Mhm. I think I might have already kind of touched on it a little bit, which is you know, you have to use your words,
Hmm.
because no matter how great a quote unquote lover or partner someone is, they cannot read your mind. And maybe they're really over time good at attuning to you where they can guess what you're thinking, but please don't rely on that. Um, and you have every right in the moment, like I said, even if it's something that you normally love, if you're not feeling it today, you say so. Or you want to try something totally different, you you got to ask for what you want and be okay with that being something that changes a lot over time and even moment to moment, and you don't owe anyone a specific experience.
Yeah, I love that. Listen closely, rewind, listen to it again, y'all. Oh my gosh, Sabrina, it has been so like wonderful and surreal to have this very different kind of conversation with you. But I'm so glad that you put this into the world for me to read and to talk to you about.
Oh, thank you
So,
so much.
yes, if people wanted to find you and your book on the internets, don't worry, all of this will be in the show notes. Where can they find you and your book?
Well, sabrinaburns.com is the website. It'll link to everything, but very easy to find on Amazon. If you are a wholesaler, whether you work at a library or a bookstore, we're on Ingram Spark. You can find it on barnesandnoble.com. I'm hoping it ends up in some bookstores. I know that it is in fact in one library at this point. So, hopefully you run into it. The book is called Come Here to Me.
Awesome. Are you on any social media thingamabobbers?
I am. I am on Instagram at Sabrina Burns Books. And when I chose that handle, I did not really think about the Burns books part of it. Like, I was like, my books, Sabrina Burns Books. And only in that the books are by Sabrina Burns. She does not actually set them on fire. But then once I made it, I was like, I kind of love that though. Now that I have
Okay.
stumbled into it, I kind of love it.
Oh my gosh, I follow you on Instagram. I did not even notice that. That's hysterical. And remember that Sabrina and her brother Eric have their own podcast where they talk about books called Euphemisms, which I will also
Yes.
link in the show notes. And it's way more book clubby than I
Yeah,
get.
it's book clubby. It's not quite so discussion-y. It's the with the subtitle it is Euphemisms, the totally normal, definitely not weird brother sister romance novel book club podcast. So
That's
you
funny.
can find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sabrina, for joining us. And I am so excited to read Charlie's story next.
Ooh, I'll have to reach out to you about some beta reading, and thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Bye.
Bye.
That's it for today, y'all. This has been a Three Paws Productions podcast. Our producer is Seffi. Michael Achenbach is our patient editor. Our theme song is written and performed by Diana Weishauer. You can find show notes and so much more at jacereadsromance.com. That's JAYCE Reads Romance. Follow along on TikTok and Instagram at Jace Reads Romance. If you'd like to ask a question or share a story for the podcast, call and leave a message at 661-JACE-RR. That's 661-529-2377. Or send an email to jace@jacereadsromance.com. Finally, like and subscribe so you can get every episode when they drop. You can also leave us a review to help others find us. And remember, this is Jace holding space for you.